open-air latrines, killer zeppelins dropping bombs on cities, pigeons carrying messages through a hail of bullets. World War I was one of the most brutal conflicts in history, and despite thousands of books being written about it, much remains to be known. Today, in this new episode of Military History, we will tell you 5 surprising things that were normal during the Great War and that you probably didn't know. Are you ready? Well then, get ready to travel back in time. Number 1. Zeppelin bombardments. Let's start with one of the inventions that revolutionized the art of war. Before the 20th century, the English were convinced that it was almost impossible for them to be attacked by a foreign power. After all, they lived on an island, separated from the rest of the European continent. What they didn't know was that on January 19, 1915, things were about to change forever. To understand the fateful events of that day, we have to go back to the year 1900 when a German nobleman, Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, invented the dirigible. This cigar-shaped aircraft could sail through the skies at about 32 kilometers per hour. The vehicle was designed as a fast and exotic form of transportation that allowed passengers to contemplate the landscape from above. At that time, people were accustomed to trains and horses, that is, land travel, so this was an absolute novelty. No one imagined that, just 15 years later, the friendly Zeppelin would turn into a machine of destruction. With the outbreak of the First World War, Germany organized a fleet of Zeppelins with the aim of terrorizing the British. In January 1915, the first aerial bombardment on English territory took place. The Zeppelins flew to the small coastal towns of Yarmouth and King's Lynn, where they dropped explosives in the middle of the streets. When the smoke cleared, the villagers discovered that 2 people had died. In the following months, the attacks continued, always following the same modus operandi. They appeared in the middle of the night, covered by darkness, only betrayed by their characteristic buzzing sound. Each Zeppelin carried, on average, about 2 tons of bombs, enough to unleash a small hell. In the village of Coppers Road, an air raid was responsible for the death of a 3-year-old girl. Since then, the press nicknamed these aircraft baby killers. The terror of the Zeppelins came to an end when the British discovered their weak point. This was none other than the hydrogen that powered the balloons, which was susceptible to fire. Using explosive bullets, it was possible to destroy a Zeppelin in a matter of seconds, reducing it to a ball of flames that, after exploding into pieces, inevitably collapsed. Here you can see the moment when one of these aircraft is shot down. Aerial attacks ended in August 1918, and it is estimated that in total, they claimed the lives of about 500 people. Number 2. Messenger pigeons. In World War I, countries relied on cutting-edge technology at the time to achieve victory. They deployed tanks, airplanes, and machine guns, but also utilized railways, telegraphs, and telephones. In a conflict of such magnitude, it was crucial for army officers to be in constant communication. This way, they could coordinate troops more easily and carry out offensive and defensive maneuvers with the least amount of casualties. However, from the beginning of the conflict, they discovered that one of the most effective ways to communicate was through messenger pigeons. Experts estimate that throughout World War I, 100,000 birds were used to deliver messages. The messages were written on a small piece of paper, which was then tied to the pigeon's leg inside a small aluminum tube. It was believed that a bird could fly up to 500 kilometers, as long as it didn't encounter a storm. The great sense of direction of pigeons was exploited to travel from any point in Europe back to their nest, which was the place where they were supposed to deliver the message. In England, they were so coveted by the army that, in 1914, it became illegal to possess them without a license. At the same time, an intense propaganda campaign was launched to encourage the population to donate their birds to the armed forces. One of the most famous messenger pigeons of World War I was Cher-Ami, who served in the United States Army. On October 3, 1918, a group of 500 American soldiers was surrounded by Germans on a hill in the Argonne forest. Desperate and on the brink of extermination, they sent 2 birds carrying a plea for help to their allies. However, the birds were shot down by the Germans. At this point, the Americans had almost no chance of getting out of there alive. Their only hope lay in the last messenger pigeon they had left, a female named Cher Ami. They tied a message to her leg and released her into the wild. When the Germans saw her, they opened fire and shot her in the chest. However, the pigeon recovered, resumed flight, and returned to her nest, which was 32 kilometers away. She was blind in one eye, one leg hung from a tendon, and she was bleeding profusely. Nevertheless, the brave animal fulfilled her mission, alerted reinforcements, and managed to save the American division. As a reward, doctors did everything possible to save her life. They succeeded, and once she recovered, they sent her to the United States, where she was awarded the Croix de Guerre, one of the highest military honors. The practice of rewarding animals was not at all unusual. As you can see in the following section, it continued during World War II.
American-hatched G.I. Joe carried a message through an artillery bombardment in Italy and saved units of the 56th London Division. Now he's got the most important chest in Britain.
After her heroic service, Cher Ami enjoyed a peaceful life and passed away in June 1919. Today, her stuffed body is on display at the National Museum of American History. Number 3. Living in trenches. It is known that trench warfare became widespread in this war. Armies dug deep trenches in the earth and took refuge inside, allowing them not only to shelter from the enemy, but also to maintain a stable position. However, this caused the war to become a static and attritional conflict. Troops did not engage in battle. Instead, they had to remain on the defensive for weeks or months. In the trenches, life was lived in deplorable conditions, enduring freezing temperatures, bone-chilling humidity, and diseases such as typhus and dysentery. The images of the time, although striking, could not convey even a fraction of how harsh life in the trenches really was. It was common for the trenches to flood after rain, so the soldiers were sunk in mud all day. Finding a dry place to rest was an impossible task. This, combined with the constant noise of gunfire and artillery, made it impossible for men to sleep. On the other hand, vermin lurked around, and one of the main pastimes of rats was devouring the corpses that lay in the trench after an attack. According to various accounts, they were so well fed that they could be the size of a small cat. Without a doubt, it was a vision to drive one insane, but the truth is that the rest of the senses were subjected to the same misfortune. The smell of the trenches was unbearable, as it consisted of a horrifying mixture of decomposing bodies, remnants of poisonous gases, damp clothing, and soldiers who could go weeks without bathing. The latrines were outdoors, and the troops had to get used to relieving themselves in front of everyone, even in the midst of bombings. To mask the stench of waste, chlorine and lime were poured over it, but all this achieved was to further poison the already nauseating atmosphere. Number 4. Combat dogs. We've already talked about the use of messenger pigeons, but keep in mind that in World War I, armies found a use for every animal at their disposal. As expected, dogs were also trained to serve on the battlefield. It is estimated that throughout the conflict, the warring countries used around 100,000 dogs with various functions. Some were tasked with transporting objects or messages from one trench to another, although they could also assist in towing machine guns or small cannons. On the other hand, it's interesting to note that, given the acute sense of smell of dogs, they were used in rescue missions. After an attack, dogs were sent to traverse the trench in search of wounded individuals who might have been trapped under the mud. Once they found someone and started barking to alert others, medics would approach. The dog also carried a small backpack on its back with disinfectant, bandages, and basic surgical instruments, which were used to treat the injured. Thanks to their brave four-legged comrades, thousands of soldiers were saved from the clutches of death. Monuments have been erected in their honor, such as the one you can see below.
A new monument in Connecticut is honoring service animals with a statue of one of the nation's most famous war dogs. The sculpture Stubby Salutes was unveiled today at Veterans Memorial Park in Middletown. The Stubby was a Boston Terrier mix that traveled to Europe with a Connecticut unit during World War I.
One of the armies that made greater use of dogs was the German army, and their preferred breeds were the German Shepherd and the Doberman. It was said that they were the most intelligent and easy to train. To train them correctly, a relationship of trust and closeness with the trainer was necessary. They were taught to maneuver in stressful situations, but this was never done through punishment, but through rewards and incentives. For example, to get them used to the noise of explosions, they were given food right after detonating an explosive charge. This way, the dog became familiar with the detonations and ensured that it wouldn't flee during a bombing. Dogs were not only trained for rescue or carrying missions, but at times their duty was as simple as accompanying a man. When a soldier was mortally wounded and lay on a bed, going through the painful moments of their last breaths, it was common to assign them a companion dog. The animal remained by their side, faithful until the end, making the agony a little less harsh. As you can see, that famous saying that the dog is man's best friend turned out to be an undeniable truth in the First World War. Number 5. Executed deserters. Throughout the war, 302 British soldiers were executed on the Western Front for the crime of desertion. Many of these men were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, although it undoubtedly demonstrates that officers were willing to enforce discipline rigorously. If it was necessary to execute a man who might be innocent, they did so with the aim of setting an example for the rest of the troops. In a war like this, where massiveness was the key, and the armed forces consisted of millions of soldiers, maintaining cohesion was essential. If a man escaped his duty and abandoned the battlefield, the effect could be contagious, and the army could completely disband. To strengthen discipline in September 1914, the British authorities reformed the military code to facilitate executions. Previously, a man accused of fleeing combat was subjected to a trial and had the right to appeal the sentence. Now, on the other hand, the possibility of appeal was eliminated, and trials were conducted expeditiously. Therefore, a man could be accused, convicted, and executed within a day. The new regulation was put into practice on September 8, 1914, when 17-year-old soldier Thomas Highgate became the first execution for the crime of desertion on the Western Front. Only 35 days had passed since the hostilities began, and the evidence used against him was the fact that he was found sleeping on a farm wearing civilian clothes. Although he tried to defend himself by claiming he had lost his memory and didn't remember anything that had happened, it was already too late. They led him to an open field and formed his comrades around so they could witness what happened to traitors. Next, bullets tore through his chest, and the name of Thomas Highgate was condemned to infamy and dishonor. We've reached the end of the video, and we want to ask you, which of these normal things in World War I do you find the most unusual? Leave your answer in the comments section below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history.